everybody, it's Carm here, coming to you on a Sunday afternoon. Beautiful day, just hanging out in the yard for a bit, and I felt like coming on and doing another response video. Fred Bigstar 1000, now on 1975, with his Gimme Ten series, going through the 70s, every week, another year, and yeah, we're halfway through the decade. This particular year, I'm a little biased towards, being that it was the one I was born in, and yeah, just wanted to show what I have here. I have a couple of non-vinyl to start out with, because I just they're important titles to me, and you know, I didn't have them all on vinyl. So well, I'll start right in with probably one of the more obvious ones, but you know, for good reason, one of the all-time greats. Cone concert and Keith Jarrett, a solo piano. Fred was mentioning the story behind this, how he played under really pretty arduous conditions, being sleep deprived and working with a rather inferior piano, but made the most of it, really in kind of an altered state of consciousness, not in the best way or the best condition, but made a real improvisational masterpiece. Still remember seeing it for the first time in the library. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and in the CD rack, just seeing this cover, wasn't sure what this was about. I hadn't heard much on ECM before, and had never heard of him, but yeah, it struck me right away. I was already getting into solo piano, so it was perfect time for it. But all-time iconic album for sure. And another one, also not on vinyl, but didn't have a copy. Mannheim Steamroller, Fresh Air, debut album. Each of their first four albums focused on a different season. This one here is spring, and I remember hearing this right around, maybe a little bit before hearing Cologne. It was the summer of '91. I might have mentioned this in my 25-year thread. Just wonderful, really for the time, particularly a unique blend of classical and rock, and even a little bit of jazz at times. Environmental sounds, which I don't think had been used a great deal on recordings up to that point, musical recordings. But that's a group I've always enjoyed, always a lot of fun. And for me, this first one though is just kind of resonates with me the most, and it stayed with me the longest. So yeah, just an old classic. Now on to the vinyl, the rest are vinyl, and this is an absolute beauty. I've had it for a long time, and wish I would have revisited it sooner. Julie Tippett's Sunset Glow. I'm sure many of you know her, wonderful singer, composer as well, improviser. Has played in so many contexts over the years. Brian Auger, I know early on when she was Julie Driscoll. This is absolutely gorgeous album by her, and this cover is just wonderful too. Really an incredible mixture of kind of ethereal folk, some jazz and improv. Really another one that's very hard to define. You see her there. Yeah, very atmospheric and kind of melancholy. You could imagine, really kind of being on the sea. It does have, I think Fred was mentioning, or somebody was mentioning Rock Bottom, Robert Wyatt's Rock Bottom, as being rather nautical. You just imagine being on the water somewhere, kind of a misty shoreline or something, and this very much is in that vein. It could be like a, her equivalent of his Rock Bottom in a sense, but yeah, just absolutely gorgeous. The first song, Mind of a Child, and last on the first side, Now If You Remember, particularly stand out for me. Just very heartrending, but would highly recommend. I know one critic had said, I'd read somewhere, she would sound great even singing the phone book, and agreed. Anything she does is wonderful that I've heard, but yeah, this is essential in my opinion. Next, another essential, and was an introduction to this artist as well. Time Wind, Klaus Schulze. again, not much needs to be said, or needs no introduction. Probably maybe one of the first sequencer-based albums I'd ever heard. I know I'd heard some early Tangerine Dream before this, but yeah, this was really galvanizing upon first listen. And yeah, the two sides, Bayreuth Return and Wanfried 1883, very contrasting. The second piece is quite moody and very sustained, whereas the first piece is more kind of goes into hyperdrive. You imagine going, really going off on a journey. But yeah, it's an essential. It was again my introduction to him, and having no idea who he was, and it was as fitting as any other. Yet another introductory album here. Terry Riley, Descending Moonshine Dervishes. I picked this up actually on CD in 1995. It was in the New Age bin actually, and at the time I pretty much picked up anything there indiscriminately, because I knew I liked a lot of it, and yeah, I wasn't quite prepared for it. Yeah, just amazing solo organ excursions, kind of somewhere between Persian Surgery Dervishes and Shri Kamal, not just chronologically but musically. The sound is becoming increasingly dense and complex with his I guess the time lag accumulator, or he explains somewhat of a complicated technical notes there of how he made this, but yeah, it's one long 51-minute piece, and yeah, just a wonderful, great nocturnal listen, I find. And yeah, it was a great introduction for me. So if you're not familiar with him, this is a good place to start, or as far as his solo keyboard or anything else, during the 70s. But yeah, just wonderful. And yet another. I'm not sure if this is the first album I heard of this artist, but it was his first kind of official ushering in. Stephen Halpern, Spectrum Suite. Kind of considered one of the early New Age healing albums. From 75. This is a reissue from 85, originally recorded in 75, came out in 75. Yeah, he's kind of the one who started it all with sound healing in more modern sense, known for his real distinctive Fender Rhodes sound. Yeah, solo Fender Rhodes and other synthesizers, and yeah, just a very, very distinctive sound, just the way it kind of goes up and down the keys, and very meditative, very, very steady state. Probably ambient before it was called that, but yeah, pretty much where it started as far as his standard sound that he's known for. But yeah, definitely a pioneer. Well, my all-time favorite artist here, Vangelis, or Vangelis. I've always pronounced it the former way. Been a fan for the longest time, and while this isn't my favorite album of his, Heaven and Hell, I wanted to show something from him, and I think this is really where it started with him, at least in the States. He had made solo albums before this, but I think they're just better known in Europe. This kind of brought in, this is on RCA, on a major label, and getting a little more well known to American audiences. And yeah, you have the contrasts of you have Heaven and Hell. You have very kind of rockish, loud, clangorous, moody approaches here, and then there's more serene. And I know some of this was used for, a good deal of it was used for Carl Sagan's Cosmos soundtrack, along with Tomita and others. I've never been a real big fan of the John and Vangelis albums, his collaboration with John Anderson of Yes, but I always liked this So Long Ago, So Clear, which is ends the first side of the album. It still resonates with me after all these years, and yeah, it just yeah, this is a pretty good introduction to his all mid-70s and onward output. As I say, to me there's better albums, but this is a good, this is where he was at at that time, in the mid 70s. Yeah, one day I'll do a feature on him, which will be ridiculously long, I'm sure. He's just an all-time favorite. And once again, I think most of these are actually intros to these artists at the respective times. Oregon in concert. Yeah, picked this up almost immediately after high school. I think I just graduated. You can see what I paid for it at the time. So this is, late '94 I got this. Yeah, as good as introduction as any, right in the, kind of the height of their, well, they were always wonderful throughout their history, I feel, but, as far as the core group, Colin Walcott, long before he passed. And I got to see them in 2002, and they were able, respective members were able to sign it for me. Really kind, very nice guys. I mean, they were, Glenn Moore and Ralph Towner were sitting on the stoop of the venue they were about to play, and here I am quite early for the show with the album under my arm, and there they are just hanging out, and I was a little tongue-tied at first, but it almost felt like I was running into a couple of my dad's old friends or something, roughly the same generation, and yeah, just real down-to-earth guys, and they were impressed that someone my age was carrying around a vinyl record before the vinyl renaissance. Yeah, just wonderful cover, everything about this album. Great balance of their composed and improvised approach. Great representation of both of those, and of course all the instruments that they play. But yeah, if you're not familiar with them, this or anything else from the 70s is just about essential. So yeah, Oregon in concert. And a couple more here. Going kind of quick because I charged up my camera, but it seemed to be a little slower than usual to charge up. Ralph Towner, Solstice. I think I'd taken for granted when I first picked this up what what an incredible group this was. I mean, what a significant meeting of musicians this was, at that time. Of course, Ralph Towner on guitars and piano, Jan Gebarg saxophones, Bernhard Weber bass, and John Christensen, Gary's favorite drummer, on drums, percussion. Yeah, just such distinctive sounds from each member, and they went on to do one more album after this, but yeah, so atmospheric and so indicative of the ECM aesthetic, however you would call it. But yeah, and I got into this probably about 20 years ago too. Right around maybe 95 or so, 96, when I was just finding a whole slew of these in the bins at the time, ECMs, and this is right in there with them, and among the greats. Absolutely love that cover. Yeah, just magnificent musicians. And finally here, last but certainly not least, an artist who's, another who needs no introduction, Brian Eno, Discreet Music. I believe my introduction to him was actually On Land. I think that was the fourth in his ambient series. This was basically his ambient album before he called it ambient, or just when he was kind of getting into that, maybe the formulation of that overall philosophy. Still incredible piece of music as far as I'm concerned, even after 40 plus years now. Yeah, a half-hour piece with the diagram and descriptive notes. Very organic, very undulating, gradually changing, misty, foggy, autumnal, but also kind of thick, hot, humid. It goes through so many. You could really play this at any time, and it seems to represent whatever space you're in some form. It's almost like it molds itself to wherever you're at the time, or you could, it's very maybe malleable in that way. Difficult to really to do it justice, but it's such a simple piece, deceptively, but just to me very powerful after all this time. And then you have the second side, which are three variations on the Canon D major by Pachelbel's canon, kind of rearranged and done according to his philosophy, kind of an ambientizing of them, you could say, with Gavin Bryars, who helped arrange the pieces. But really interesting hearing. It was actually my introduction to that piece, which I'd heard many times over, but I think this is one of the finest versions of Pachelbel's canon. Other ones maybe tend to be a little syrupy, but I like how this one kind of strips it down and just does interesting things with it. And of course the cover. I think all the the obscure albums of his, they all have these kind of neat covers, all done from films. But yeah, as good a place as any to start with is the ambient side of Eno. I know others were mentioning I can't think. Oh, Another Grain World. That's another wonderful one too. I never had it on vinyl, but I think this came right after it, and also came out of you mentioned having an accident. It was an auto accident, and was in bed and recuperating, and a lot of this kind of came to him, kind of a revelation. But yeah, pretty much where it started with him in a more more cohesive way. But yeah, wonderful stuff, discreet music. So yeah, well, those are my Gimme 10 for 1975, and yeah, there's a couple that obvious ones that I weren't in here that I'll probably give their own video. One in particular, I want to give it its own video, kind of like the previous one, 1972, the one I left off. But yeah, so yeah, just want to come on and do that. For those again not familiar with Fred's channel, please check him out, and yeah, there's still half a decade to go to participate in the Gimme Tens. So I hope we're all well, and thanks for watching, and until next time, peace, love, and joy.